Okay, I'm going to make a start, but conscious that there are still people joining, just in the interest of time. My name is Zita Holborn, and I'm the National Chair of BARAC UK. So I'll be chairing the event, and with me, I'll ask them to give a little wave. Got Hector Wesley, who's BARAC's International Officer, Donna Guthrie, who's our Women's Officer, and Jean-Marc Akakadu, who is a filmmaker and who is the maker of the film that we're going to be discussing and watch segments of today. We are going to record the whole meeting. So if you don't want to be on camera, because we'll put it on YouTube and social media, then you might want to turn your cameras off now. At the bottom, where you've got mute and stop video, if you press stop video, that will take your picture off the meeting. And we'd also ask that unless you're speaking, that you mute as well, and the mute button is on the bottom left hand corner. I think most people are muted already, just so that we don't pick up background noise when we are speaking and watching segments of the film. So, and the other thing I wanted to mention at the start is that we said that we would live stream the full film after this event. But what we've done is we have set it up, or Jean-Marc has set it up on its own dedicated Facebook page. But what we're going to do is share the film, so the whole recording is there, the whole video is there, and it's nearly 1.5 hours long, 1 hour 23 minutes I think it is. So we'll post that onto our BARAC, a link to that on our BARAC Twitter, onto our BARAC page on Facebook, and onto our BARAC group on Facebook. So you can search those if you're not already members by putting in BARAC UK in the search box on Facebook, or Black Activists Rising Against Cuts in the search box on Facebook. And our Twitter handle is @BARAC UK, BARAC UK. So then you'll be able to just watch the film at your own leisure and in your own time at any point, which you'll have the link to watch it. And then the recording of this meeting, in case you want to share it with others, because I know I've received some messages from people that have sent apologies and can't make it, that we will put the recording up on YouTube and then share on social media probably tomorrow. That will happen by tomorrow evening, but it might be earlier. So look out for it there. So I'm going to start with a poem. Amongst other things, we'll do some proper introductions in a bit. A performance poet, writer, and I'm going to share a poem called Redefining History, which is about a celebration and acknowledgement of the contribution of the Windrush generation to the UK. And it's in my book, Striving for Equality, Freedom and Justice, which is a book of my poetry, fusing the political with the poetical, and it also includes my quotes, my illustrations, which including the cover. There's a little plug for my book there, Redefining History. We, our parents, our grandparents came to this country, and in half a century redefined Britain's history. Arriving by ship enthusiastically, we were greeted by the mist and the grey of the sea. The bitter cold of the winter season was nothing compared to the ice-cold freezing attitude of those in this country, full of hatred and hostility. Greeted by signs of keep Britain white, we come unprepared for a fight. No dogs, no Irish, no blacks. We had to always watch our backs. We were told this was the mother country. What mother uses terms that are derogatory? What kind of mother rejects and sets out to inject a sense of worthlessness within the child she should caress? For 50 years, we've struggled and fought, sometimes defiant, sometimes distraught, to make a place and be accepted as young or old and black and gifted. And look what we've achieved despite having to live aggrieved. We've excelled within this land that refused a helping hand. We built and developed the NHS, made London transport one of the best, established a carnival while we were oppressed that's now renowned as Europe's largest, facing fascism and humiliation, tackling racism and discrimination. Just look what we've achieved despite having to live aggrieved. We've excelled within this land that refused a helping hand, in spreading the word of the Holy Scriptures in trade unions and in literature, in sports and politics, in broadcasting, in music, in entertainment and education. We helped empower this nation. Despite the fact we were deceived, we came and we achieved. We, our parents, our grandparents came to this country and in half a century redefined Britain's history. Redefined Britain's history. Thank you. So on to the main event. Today is the 10-year anniversary of BARAC being founded. When we were set up, we didn't anticipate in a million years that we'd still be going 10 years later. We thought that we were going to be a short-lived campaign which was focused on austerity. We use the term Black in its broadest political sense to encompass people who are from the African and Asian diasporas. We thought that we were going to campaign against how austerity was going to impact on Black communities, workers and service users. Perhaps we would be running that campaign for a year and that would be the end of it. But actually, hand in hand with austerity came deepening racism for Black communities, deepening injustice, attacks on migrant communities, migrants and refugees. And so we kept going and we kept campaigning and more things came up, and here we are still 10 years later. But if it hadn't been for lockdown and coronavirus, we would have had, you know, an all-day event, a celebration. Although I keep thinking, should we be celebrating the fact that we've been campaigning against racism and injustice for 10 years? Because in reality, we shouldn't need to. You know, we shouldn't have to campaign and fight. And as you've seen on the streets over the last few weeks, globally, people have been making that same argument and shouting out Black Lives Matter. So, you know, we anticipate that we will still be needed to be around and to continue campaigning for some time to come. And so what we're going to do is, I do want to look back, so I'm going to share with you a few details about who we are and what we've been doing in the last 10 years. But we also wanted to highlight one of the many ongoing injustices that is continuing today in the UK. Tomorrow marks National Windrush Day, which is supposed to be a celebration of the contribution of people from the Caribbean to the UK. But we feel like it is a kick in the teeth. It's quite insulting to still have this ongoing horrendous injustice that's facing the Windrush generation, but also their descendants, because part of our campaigning has been about the impact on the descendants of the Windrush generation and how they've been targeted as well under the hostile environment. We thought on the eve of Windrush Day, which is coinciding with our anniversary, it would be a good idea to highlight, promote and launch the film that's been made by Jean-Marc. Jean-Marc has followed me and followed BARAC and followed other Windrush campaigners the length and breadth of the country for 2 years, and has documented our campaigning, but also documented by speaking directly to the people affected, how it's impacted on them and what they've been through. And so you'll see in the film, it's a mix of what we've been doing to campaign against it and the stories of the individuals, quite rightly, who are directly impacted and still going through things. Only 36 people under the Windrush compensation scheme you know, have received any compensation at all. We've had the reports and investigation into the Home Office by Wendy Williams, which is looking at what Windrush, which fell short of saying that the Home Office was institutionally racist, but did say it was institutionally ignorant of racism, and came up with a host of recommendations. And we now have the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who are also doing an investigation into matters. But we've had report upon report into all aspects of racism, but very little action to address the discrimination and injustice that people are facing. So that's why we felt it'd be important to show the film and promote the film at this event. So for the past 10 years, first of all, actually, let me introduce the other speakers that are here today. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Donna Guthrie. Give us a wave, Donna, and hello. Donna is the National Women's Officer of BARAC UK. So she's a founding member of BARAC. She's been an anti-racist and anti-fascist campaigner and national organizer, lifelong campaigner against racism. She's a trade union activist in the Unite the Union, and is active and elected to positions at regional and national level, and also in the BAME structures of Unite. And she's also a Labour Party activist, and she champions and campaigns in her local community to bring people together and to focus on the issues that are happening locally, as well as the work she does with us nationally and in the trade union movement. Hector Wesley, give us a wave, Hector. Hector is a long-standing trade union activist in the Public and Commercial Services Union. He's a senior trade unionist there. He's a member of the National Executive Committee, liaison officer to our National Black Members Committee there, and is a lead negotiator and deputy president in one of the largest sectors in the union, and was there on the day we founded BARAC. So he's definitely a founding member in the very first conversation we had about creating BARAC. Jean-Marc is a French filmmaker. Give us a wave, Jean-Marc.
Hi, everyone.
The person who's made the film. He has lived in the UK since 1997. He studied film and broadcasting at the London Met University. He's worked for various corporate and broadcasting companies, and he founded the JMAK Group in 2012 with the vision to expose and reveal the truth of injustices taking place in the world. And Jean-Marc is happily married with 3 beautiful children. And so, yeah, I better say a bit about me as well. So I'm the National Chair of BARAC UK. I'm the co-founder. I co-founded BARAC UK with Lee Jasper, who I'm also going to say a bit about in a second. I've been a community and trade union activist for many years in all sorts of different organisations and groups. I'm the National Vice President of the Public and Commercial Services Union, and I'm also the Joint National Chair of the Artists Union England. And I'm part of the UNESCO Coalition of Artists for the General History of Africa, a designer, a poet, a writer, and an author and vocalist. I'm very much involved in the creative fields and the arts, as well as activism, and I try to fuse the two together and use the arts to campaign against injustice and discrimination and for human rights. So BARAC was founded in the summer of 2010 because we anticipated that the cuts that were going to come under the Tories, which ended up being a condemn coalition, which we didn't know at the time we were founded that it would be a condemn coalition, were going to have devastating impacts on Black communities and Black workers and Black service users. And so it was founded by myself and Lee Jasper. Lee Jasper is a long-standing human rights and community activist, former advisor on equality to the Mayor of London when it was Ken Livingstone, a member of many justice and race organisations, including the 1990 Trust, the founder of Operation Black Vote, and is also a co-founder of current organisation, sister organisation to BARAC UK, Black Socks, which is a social justice organisation. And so hand in hand with discrimination, we found that, with austerity and cuts, we found actually that injustice was deepening for Black communities, racism was deepening, and so our remit broadened from being about just anti-austerity to all of those issues. So we've, over the years, supported family justice campaigns. We've launched all sorts of campaigns, Elbow Out Ebola. We've had the MLK 50 campaign for jobs and justice on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, which was a year-long campaign. We've been part of the Boycott the Human Zoo campaign. We've campaigned against discrimination in the arts and culture sector. We're part of the Mary Seacole campaign to keep Black historical figures on the curriculum. We caused the education secretary to do a U-turn in that campaign. And we also got the British Olympic Association to do a U-turn through the Voice Olympics campaign. So there's been a whole host of things that we've campaigned on and marched on and protested on. And one of the major things, as already mentioned, over recent years has been Windrush injustice. But we've actually been campaigning on this issue nearly as long as we've existed, since 2012. And in 2012, we co-founded the movement against xenophobia, and that was set up to oppose what was then the immigration bill, which became an act and is still going on and being added to as we speak, which we highlighted at the time was going to have the impact it did end up having on people from the Windrush generation across Commonwealth countries and across the Asian, African and Caribbean countries who had come to the UK to settle. And we didn't have much support. That law sailed through Parliament, and we sort of count on one hand the number of MPs who supported our campaign and came to our protests and hosted us in Parliament. And those people included Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, who have been great friends of ours and supported us, you know, through our journey in terms of bringing things into Parliament. And we've had a parliamentary arm and a legal arm, and I could see that a fantastic and brilliant lawyer, Peter Dutt, who was there at the beginning, is on this course. A big shout out and thank you to our Peter. And so I want to thank, you know, some of the people that have been part of that, because we set up structures across the UK. We've built up sort of BARAC locals in different cities. And I would like to thank Maxie Hales, who sort of led our our Birmingham branch of BARAC, along with several other people. Colette Williams, who led our Manchester branch, Paulette North in Bristol, and Graham Campbell in Glasgow for Scotland. There are numerous other people who've been part of that journey, but if I was to name every single one, we would be here for the rest of the day and we wouldn't do anything else in this meeting. So just big shout out and big thank you to absolutely everybody who has been involved, and especially to Lee Jasper, who founded BARAC with me and stepped down a few years ago. Said he was going into retirement, but he's still there and still active and still doing things. You know, he has sort of been my partner in running the organisation, and Hector and Donna are a crucial part to running it now on an everyday basis. So I now want to look at my agenda and remind myself where I am actually. So that's looking back at 10 years. So the next thing I want to do is to ask Jean-Marc to say a few words and introduce the first segment of the film that we're going to show today and screen that. Over to you, and thank you, Jean-Marc.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you again for being here to celebrate 10 years anniversary for BARAC UK. I had the pleasure to meet Zita about 2-3 years ago. And as you said, I founded a company which, you know, the purpose of it was to expose within the truth to all the injustice that's taking place in the world. And as we as I follow Zita over the last 2 years, really looking into the Windrush Scandal, the first section that I wanted to show you is how it started, because as you mentioned, they've been campaigning since 2012, but actually how it's beginning to blow up with the media, is beginning to be more open. So this is about 30-minute section of the film where we have some of the interviews just to really sharing their experiences, and some of the activists really kind of giving a bit of a background understanding of what's taking place during this.
When I did come back into England, I got stopped. And they said to me that we're not going to let you back into the country.
I've known people who have self-harmed. I myself have considered suicide on occasions because this is my home.
Well, Downing Street says it has just accepted the resignation of its Home Secretary.
Amber Rudd was in the spotlight as the controversy deepened around how her office treated members of the so-called Windrush generation.
The United Kingdom's Home Secretary has resigned from her post after an ongoing immigration scandal. Amber Rudd said she resigned for inadvertently misleading a committee during a questioning about the so-called Windrush Scandal.
Windrush generation, meaning people who came from across the Commonwealth pre-73, which, you know, includes people from Jamaica and Windrush, but also all the rest of the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, and so on.
About 2010, we always started to notice it very early on, around 2011, with deportations starting to increase and charter planes being ordered.
This was happening to people here and there, you know, individuals, but there's a huge stigma attached to it. So people didn't necessarily come forward. Some people would have been deported and didn't go public on it because of that stigma and shame and, you know, trauma and just like confusion over what's actually happening, something that could happen quite fast.
We need to put an end to any more illegal deportation of British citizens, and I mean British citizens, people that have been here since they were children, people that have been here for over 60 years and now facing sacked from their jobs. They're facing no medical support, they're facing lack of benefits, they're losing their properties, they're having to beg, steal and borrow to find money to get lawyers in order to be able to stay in this country.
We have a situation where people who came pre-73 often divided at the time their family across borders because they couldn't afford to bring everyone at once. They've answered a call, which is a call to rebuild Britain. They've been invited, encouraged, recruited to come to rebuild the wealth of Britain.
There was direct recruitments that were done by the Employment Office, Department of Employment in the UK, by large public sector employers that went, you know, even mill owners that went to the Caribbean and other countries and did direct recruitment.
And they've sacrificed to do it. And they've hoped for a better future as a result of it.
People thought they were coming. They were part of the British Empire, that generation, as far as they were concerned. They were quite proud of the links to Britain, even though all of that is a legacy of colonialism and enslavement, effectively racism in itself.
We're already hearing the horror stories of people being denied healthcare, hospital treatment as a consequence of their status, presumed status. We're already hearing about people losing their homes, their livelihoods, and their marriages breaking up.
People came, they've worked all their lives, they've bought their houses, they've raised their families, they've raised children and grandchildren, and then suddenly find out, okay, well, you're here illegally, you can't stay, you're going to be deported, or effectively exiled, because imagine you only went away for a 2-week holiday. So you've got your job, you've got your home, you know, and you can't come back to the country. So people have found their homes repossessed, or if it was social housing or, you know, privately rented.
I mean, people just don't understand the level of disaster that these things visit upon our community. And it's not just that individual, it's the entire family who have to bear the stress and cost for sometimes years and years of denial of wrongly denied citizenship.
They may have lost all their belongings if they didn't have a family member to go and salvage it before it was destroyed or given away.
We've had people where their hair have fallen out, they've lost loads of weight, people have had cancer. The cancer's been exacerbated because of the stress that they suffered, families torn apart, lost perfectly good, honest jobs, lost out in the pension entitlement.
We've got countless examples of elderly people being deported to Jamaica, no money, nowhere to live, no family connections, who have been targeted in terms of criminality or just treated appallingly.
It took some time for it to unfold and to be really exposed, and it's something that, you know, we were campaigning on, as I said, a number of years ago.
Due to the enforced new hostile environment regime brought in by the 2004 Act, migrants then were required to report weekly, monthly, depending on where they lived, to a police station to sign documents to make sure that people knew where they are and so on and so forth. Well, what happened then, that gave the Home Office a steady stream of people that it could put on charter planes to send back home.
They go for people who are low-hanging fruit, people who are complying with the system, that are signing in with the Home Office, that may be going through appeals or going through a process of naturalisation.
And of course, what we found over the last year, 18 months, is that 5 of the individuals who were sent back home, particularly to Jamaica, were murdered in Jamaica because they left Jamaica because they'd given evidence against people who committed crimes and so on over there. So when they were returned on some minor technicality, they themselves were subject to grievous murder.
I mean, up to this day, you know, some of the people that I've been supporting and trying to help with their campaigns, you know, for Right to Remain, will put out on Twitter, for example, I'm going to sign in today with the Home Office. If you don't hear from me in the next few hours, be worried and please do something about it, because, you know, your phone can be taken away and so on, then they will give you a different phone. But in that transition period of transporting you, detaining you, transporting you to the detention centre, you may not even have the means to contact people.
We've seen people, a young boy who was homeless in the middle of in Kingston, Jamaica, born all his life here, didn't have a clue what he was supposed to do, and was teased and bullied mercilessly by the local Jamaican kids. As it is, he's a foreign child, he doesn't speak any Jamaican, everybody thinks he's an idiot, and he was bullied mercilessly.
My uncle was directly affected, as are lots of people's family members. I mean, the more you go to meetings, whether you're in the social movement, whether it's in unions or campaign groups, you find people that know people in their family and directly affected. It's becoming much more wide scale.
I've had to visit an 86-year-old at the request of her daughter, because she's Caribbean, from Trinidad and Tobago, and she was ill, but she wouldn't go to the hospital because she thought they were going to deport her. And this was this year. And I had to go and convince her that actually I'd come with you, there's no threat of you getting deported and so on and so forth. But this is the effect that it's having on people. People are saying, I'm not going to send my kid to school because I think they're going to try and comfort me in some way, or I'm not going to seek medical help because I don't know whether they're going to deport me.
I don't class myself as an illegal immigrant. Illegal immigrant to me is when someone crosses the border without any knowledge of the Home Office. Immigration accept me through the airport with a landing ticket, paid for, insured.
What the scandal did was it helped to bring people's voices up, to say, actually, yes, it's happening in my family, my aunt or my cousin or my, uncle, my dad, my brother, my mum.
So
If you take my passport from 2003 and the rules that I tried to renew in my extension under, it was under the 5 years rule.
In 2016, around 15, 16, he then was asked, because of his GP changing a catchment area, to provide evidence of his status in the UK, because obviously when he gets a form, it's not born in this country, and now after 1914, it now starts asking more questions if you're not born in this country, to answer more questions and provide more information. So he was asked to provide information. He's thinking, I don't have a passport, I've never travelled. Not only has he never travelled, he never had an independent passport, because his Jamaican passport wasn't really his, it was my mum's. That's expired a long time ago. No one has a passport for him. So his life then just unravelled. He lost access to his benefits. He was on ESA and disability living allowance for his illnesses. He lost all those. He started losing his help with his rent. He went into rent arrears, and then eventually he had to reach out to his family in a complete distressed state. People are very proud of that generation, very proud that they are sorted, they've sorted themselves out, they're in control of their lives, and all of a sudden they're in control of nothing.
Going to my MP, I had to then thought, you know what, I've got enough paperwork, HMRC, I've got Department of Work and Pay, I've got all the paperwork, a large part of it. I'm going to go and see my MP. So I went to a surgery and I saw a representative, and I sort of like, I said, look, this is what my story is. Oh my God, how come? Okay, we're going to take it to the main MP. I took it, I waited, and then I got a letter back saying, you need to just go and naturalise. And I was like, but this is what I'm saying, I can't work, I can't get benefits. I'm basically selling second-hand stuff within my house for me to live, because that's the only way I was able for me to live. But then when my MP turned around and I got that letter, I was like, well, there's no hope. So straight away I went straight into depression. I didn't know what to do. I just felt lost. I felt there's no one else for me to turn to, because I can't fight a government. I haven't got money to fight them. I can't pay a solicitor because I haven't got money to pay a solicitor. So whatever happens, happens to me. There's nothing more. But my concern was mostly for my son again. I got to the stage where he's getting depressed and I'm more depressed, and I went to bed. I couldn't sleep because you know, you're uneasy. And I woke up one morning, I just said, I think if I just take some tablets and sort of like close my eyes, perhaps this will all go away. Perhaps it will just all disappear.
If in 2003 I put my application in, and then 2008 my passport would be expired, why you keep my passport until it expired, and then you said I am illegal, and I am an illegal immigrant?
Thank you, Jean-Marc. So I think just seeing that 30-minute segment of a 1.5-hour film really gives you an insight into just how horrendous the situation is. One of the things that BARAC did a couple of years ago is join with other race equality groups that we've actually been campaigning with for many years. We founded BME Lawyers for Grenfell prior to this, but we formed BAME Lawyers for Justice, which is all the law associations for Muslim, for Black and for Asian lawyers, together with BARAC, Lee's organisation and others. And then we joined with a wider group of Windrush justice groups across the UK to campaign on these issues. So I'd now like to invite Donna Guthrie, our BARAC Women's Officer, to speak.
Oh God, that film was so moving. But it kind of illustrates, and with Zita's contributions at the beginning when she introduced BARAC and our roles, what we've been doing as campaigners, some of the systematic racism and structural racism we've had to suffer as Black people and still suffer. We suffer every single day. We know as Black people, even if we don't want to be campaigners, even if we want to put our heads down and just try and see how we can last out the days, the years, the months, whatever, that we know that our life chances are impacted by systematic racism every day of our lives because of the colour of our skin. Every indicator of every survey and report on inequality in society in terms of our experiences bears out what we are telling the world, that is that discrimination is impacting us on every level, whether it's education, employment, housing, health, the criminal justice system, to name but for a few. As BARAC Women's Officer, I've campaigned, as Zita said, to highlight the disproportionate impact of racism and the cuts and austerity under both the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition government and now the Conservative government on Black women in particular. I've also been, as Zita's mentioned, a lifelong campaigner against racism and fascism and was a national campaigner against the BNP for about 8 years of my life. So I've been heavily involved in lots of activity to challenge racism and to demand justice and build equality and unity in struggle. I had the proud privilege of being the London organiser for the coordinator for the Windrush Day of Action last year, which was featured on that film a little bit. But one of the most poignant parts of that campaign and our determination to ensure that the Windrush injustice was still highlighted, even though we had a Windrush Day established, was the organising meetings that took place, some of which took place in my union's head office and national office, Unite the Unions, in the evening, where we painted our banner that was held over Westminster Bridge, and we organised our intervention on the 22nd of June last year, 2019. One of the people that attended, along with young Black activists, young trade unionists, and trade unions and people involved in the movement already, were people affected, including two elders who were directly affected, who spoke at that meeting and cautioned us and ensured that it was very clearly heard that they were not interested in celebrating Windrush Day. It wasn't a day of celebration for them, because as far as they're concerned, they're still facing injustice. One of whom was Herbert Howard, who actually marched with us on Windrush Day across from Downing Street and campaigned across with us on the loudspeakers and walked with the banners to Westminster Bridge, where we blocked the traffic and held the banner over the bridge. And shortly later, you know, it's quite poignant because I think he's in the film as well. Although he's so he basically died 3 weeks after receiving British citizenship. Okay. With no apology, no compensation. Zita's highlighted a number of people impacted in that film segment that you saw today, people that have been impacted and are still seeking justice and still haven't had compensation. And as Zita's mentioned, it's absolutely appalling, and we do need to continue to highlight the injustice that we as Black people face. I won't carry on too long because I know we're on time. But I just want to talk about the Black Lives Matter campaign at the moment and the rallying cry for Black people, because I think it's really important for us to understand, for people who are listening to understand that it's not a slogan. It's us literally as Black people saying we have had enough. We have watched the murder on our screens of George Floyd, but this has ignited for us the pain that we have suffered for 400 years, the death by 1,000 cuts, whether we have been brutalised in the way that we have seen George Floyd be murdered in front of our screens. Many people have campaigned around the deaths in custody in Britain as well. But we are suffering from the traumatic effects of racism on a daily basis. And it's quite important for people to understand who are providing us with solidarity at the moment and helping us in this campaign to rid our society of racism, that they understand that we are at the moment very traumatized and we're revealing the scars on our bodies. I just want to share with you quickly just one of the many racist experiences, and I could talk about many, as many Black people could. I remember one of my first memories of racism, having to go as a 7-year-old child to Knightsbridge Crown Court to testify, and I had a judge asked me to put my hand on the Bible, and he explained to me, did I understand what the Bible was? And I had to testify in a court case at Knightsbridge Crown Court because my uncle, who was later a Windrush victim himself, at that time had been harassed on a continuous basis and arrested by police, and had been charged with holding an offensive weapon, which was a mirror and a comb set, plastic mirror and comb set that I had won at a fair at my school. And I had to go there and testify that I had got this mirror and comb set in a tombola prize thing at school, and it got all the way to court, the harassment. And, you know, it's just little things like that where you think, as a child, you have to go and defend someone against the brutalisation of your uncle around racism and harassment by the police. So I'll kind of end it there, but those kind of things are the scars that people are revealing and are having to deal with on a regular basis, and it's really relentless, and we look forward to the day that we can fight together and continue to fight together to end this oppression. And I'm really proud of the achievements of my sisters and brothers in BARAC UK and all the contributions and organisations that have joined with us in our campaigning work in the last 10 years.
Thank you very much, Donna. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Hector Wesley to speak, our international officer.
And thanks, Donna. I know you addressed me as international officer. I think the more accurate term is the officer who does a little bit occasionally, certainly compared to the contribution that you and Donna make to the organisation. I mean, as Donna said earlier on, I never thought BARAC would be needed to be still going 10 years from now. In some ways, certainly in recent weeks with Black Lives Matter, I've had to reflect about some of the things that we've dealt with in the past and where we're going. And I think in some ways I'm hopeful because I've seen things in recent days that I never thought I'd see. You know, Zita will know that I like football, and I was watching Match of the Day yesterday evening, and there was a discussion about racism before they showed the match. Gary Lineker, Alan Shearer, and Ian Wright, and they were talking about racism for about a good 10-15 minutes before the match was played. And, you know, Ian Wright referred to the case of Christopher Order. I thought that was amazing. I never thought I would see that situation happen in this country. So in some ways, I'm hopeful. But then when you read the reports about what Clive Murray's been going through recently and Lewis Hamilton, you think, actually, are we going a few steps forward and a few steps back? The main reason why I've always wanted to be involved with BARAC is that basically, given my background, you have to be against discrimination because you see the effect of it every single day. I mean, if I go back to when I was a child, the acts of discrimination that I've gone through, and I still remember those. I remember those when I first joined the civil service, some of the things that went on in the civil service when I joined 27 years ago. Those things are still with you, and you don't forget those things. I think the key thing for me, which I think is hopeful in recent weeks, is I think people are now more than I think there have been previously to actually speak up and say, this is not acceptable. We're not accepting this anymore. I mean, when I saw the murder of George Floyd, it chilled me, but it's not the first time I've seen a videotape like that. The reaction, I think, has been extraordinary. I know in my own organisation, I've had senior officials, like the chief executive of my organisation, put out a statement to all the staff of the organisation, and it had the words Black Lives Matter in the statement. that had an impact us doing that. And I don't thought personally I would ever see that. So I think something clearly is happening. Something clearly happening. I'm not sure where it goes, but something is clearly happening. One of the things certainly BARAC has always looked to do is, obviously we've campaigned a lot in Britain, but we've also had links internationally, because we've always had that outlook, because we looked to oppose injustice wherever it occurs. And that's certainly one of the things that I'm very, very keen that we continue to do. We do occasional humanitarian work, for example, in the refugee camps in Calais, and that's sometimes controversial. I mean, I've had uncomfortable conversations with fellow trade unions who are saying, why are you going to France to do aid when there's probably causes in this country where people are suffering, in their view, just as badly? So these things are not tricky, and I'm always happy to have those uncomfortable conversations, because I'm very clear that the things that we do in BARAC are the correct things that we do, because we're quite clear that we absolutely are primarily against fighting racial injustice, but we also link up and support and work with other groups who are facing oppression of their own. So, for example, we work with people and disabled people fighting the oppression that they face, and we will link up, and because often, in many ways, we have common cause, and we will work together. I'm quite hopeful, because I firmly believe, actually, and recent events has confirmed my view, I think the vast majority of people in this country are reasonable, decent people. And if you have a decent conversation with them, if you put the case of injustice, they will say they don't like injustice. I mean, just briefly on Windrush, the fact that the Daily Telegraph put on their front page stuff criticising the Conservative government over Windrush indicated to me that actually the Windrush scandal cut through in the public consciousness, which in a way that I didn't predict. The key thing is sustaining that. And it's sustaining the other struggles like Black Lives Matter. I mean, Zita and Donna will know, many a year on a cold October Saturday morning, we will go to central London for the United Friends and Family demonstration. And we will always sometimes bemoan, you know, we do get a relatively decent turnout, but it's not as much as certainly we would like. But I would hope, actually, as part of some of the galvanisation of the views of people that are saying that this is not acceptable, if we do the demo, the United Friends and Family demo this year, there'll be far more people there at that demonstration to make absolutely clear that campaign has to be supported. Because yes, you know, what happened to George Floyd was absolutely outrageous and absolutely disgraceful. But UK has had similar things happen in this country. We should not kid ourselves that we're just sort of like latching on to something that happens in the United States. We have our own issues in this country that we have to address. So hopefully, we maybe, you know, I was wondering, we've done 10 years. What's going to happen in the next 10 years? Will BARAC be around in another 10 years? In an ideal world, clearly, we'd hope the need for BARAC would not be there 10 years from now. But I'm quite clear we've got a job of work to do going forward. You know, we've got the issues to do with COVID-19, and I think we're going to have all sorts of issues flowing from that, because I'm fairly clear there's going to have to be a full inquiry into what transpired in the government's handling of the COVID-19, and I personally think there's going to be a reckoning for some of the errors that the government made. So I think we've got a work to do, but I would strive toward the day that actually we don't need to have a BARAC anymore, and I think something that we should all actually strive for. So I'll end there. Thanks, Zita.
Thank you so much, Hector. Hector mentioned the humanitarian aid work we do. He said occasionally. Well, we've actually been doing it for 7 years, and we go every 2 or 3 months. We haven't been able to go through lockdown, so what we sought to do is to support families who have no recourse to public funds, which is another aspect of the hostile environment. People who legally can work in the UK have lost their job because of coronavirus issues with their companies, and then they cannot claim any benefits or any of the measures that the government have introduced. And so in my local area, you know, I've been involved in providing food parcels every week to those families. One of the families had a new baby and needed all the equipment with zero income, you know, during this period. So that's another horrendous aspect. But we have a GoFundMe page. It's BARAC Humanitarian Aid. I might ask Hector to put a link into the chat, please. And if you can support us, that would be welcome, because as soon as the lockdown's over, we'll be back going to France. And yesterday was World Refugee Day, and we sent out a message highlighting what's happening actually, because refugees aren't even being considered or looked at in terms of COVID, but actually they need to be, because if you're going to rid every country and every part of the world from the coronavirus, you also have to protect and support those people who are displaced, and who are displaced through no choice of their own, because of climate change, because of conflict, because of poverty, and because of persecution. So do support our GoFundMe if you can do, going forward, because we know times are hard. And also, Hector, if you could put the United Family and Friends link. And Hector mentioned that this is an annual march that's called by the families under this organisation UFFC who have lost loved ones at the hands of the state. And it will be on the 31st of October, and it's from Trafalgar Square to Downing Street, if in terms of coronavirus and lockdown it is possible for it to go ahead. But I'm sure they have a website, they'll update and say if it's not going ahead physically, if it's going to end up being something different, like a virtual event. But it happens every year, and everybody is welcome to come and give their support. We're going to take a few questions. And I wanted to start by, we asked if anybody wanted to send anything in advance, and we had a couple. And Eulalie Pennant, who's with us, who you've just seen in the film, who's one of the people impacted, has sent through a short statement. And Eulalie, I wanted to check with you, did you want to read that statement, or would you like us to? You on mute? Need to unmute? We can't hear you. You need to unmute.
It's okay for you to, good evening, everyone.
Evening, afternoon.
To read it for me, Zita.
Okay, all right. Hector, are you going to read that one out for us, please? Yeah, this is a statement from Eulalie about how she's impacted and continues to be impacted. Thank you for sending that, Eulalie. It's appreciated.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, people can hear me hopefully. I just want to raise the awareness of my concerns, as I'm also affected by the Windrush Scandal in March 2018, being on various campaigns and demonstrations after being detained at Yardswood Detention Centre. Suffered injustice by the Home Office in losing my one son, who was deported for a driving offence and murdered 5 months after he was deported. I am still suffering injustices, because even though I am finally granted a biometric permit until 2022, it is a biometric permit with no recourse to public funds. I paid immigration health surcharge of £600 on top of over £40,000 in lawyers and barristers' fees since 2003, fighting my immigration case after my passport and documents and right of abode landing papers have been destroyed by the Home Office. I have still not gotten back my passport from the Home Office. This is what led to the whole Windrush scandal. After speaking out and demonstrating at the Jamaican High Commission, and after campaigning and lobbying in Parliament, which resulted in Amber Rudd resigning and Theresa May stepping down. I have been in lockdown, as we've all had to because of the COVID-19 pandemic, under no recourse to public funds and no compensation after so much hard fight that leads to the whole Windrush scandal, as a descendant of a grandfather who has fought for 49 years in the army to help make Britain great. I am disappointed in the whole process of the Windrush scandal and compensation scheme, and just voicing my concerns as a descendant who is also has been affected also. Thanks for reading this.
Thank you, and thank you, Eulalie, for sharing that with everybody. And I'm sure everybody here in this meeting will join me in sending and conveying to you our love and solidarity for your ongoing struggle. And we're with you, and we will continue to stand with you and support you. And we're sorry for your loss as well, as we know how difficult this must be to share this in this group with us. We're here for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hector, there was another advanced question that came in. Do you want to read that as well?
Yep, okay, I can do that.
Gavin on the line and wants to in the meeting. Gavin in the meeting and wants to say it himself. If you
she's there. I think
unmute. No?
Yes, please.
Gavin.
Yeah.
No, Gavin.
Oh.
It's from Gavin.
It's no one.
Okay, let's read it, Hector. Read Gavin.
Okay, I read Gavin one. I think there's one more coming. There's one more coming while we've been on. I've just seen it on my email. I'll just read this one out. I totally respect your work. Looking back over the last decade, what would you say are the key events that have got us to where we are now? Where do you think we could be 10 years from now?
Okay, let's take a couple more. So you said there's another one come through.
Yeah.
Does somebody want to share to say one? Who is it?
This is from Beverly P. Yeah.
Okay,
it's quite a number of.
If you want to say your question.
I can read it. There's a few questions in the. Shall I read it?
Yeah, please.
Okay. This is from Beverly Patterson. Great work, BARAC. Thanks to social media, I'm happy to learn about your organisation and join this meeting today. The comments and questions I have raised reflect my personal opinions. I represent less than 1% of the UK population, not because I am black, but because I studied at Oxford and Cambridge. There were times when I received negative comments about this from black and white people. As a young person, I decided to keep quiet about it until now. So my questions to you are, what new legislation should we campaign for to ensure equal opportunities and justice, brackets, especially for the Windrush Scandal, which has devastated so many lives? There's a number of parts of the question. What can we do to ensure that people are not judged and disadvantaged because of the colour of their skin? What can we do to ensure that all of our children get access to good education and do their best? Education may be a key to solving the problem. What can we do to increase representation of descendants from the African and Caribbean diaspora in the judicial system, the academic system, in government and at the corporate level? What can we do to increase aspirations and expectations? And then there's some comments I'll read there as well. Collectively, we represent about 3% of the population. We have become very influential in music, acting, religion, and in the entertainment world. Our next goal should be the legal and academic institutions. There are many talented young people of colour emerging, and when we have a black chancellor at Oxford or Cambridge, or a black president at one of the colleges, I will be singing from the mountaintops. We must stop feeding our young people with so much negativity. Let's look forward to the future in a positive way.
Thank you so much for that. Some important points. Quite a lot of questions though to answer in the time we've got. That wasn't one question, that was like lots of questions. I want to actually come back on those first two questions just because I think we'll lose it if I take anybody else. There was so much in that first one. And then see if Donna, you want to come in as well. So I think on the 10 years question, yeah, so my thing on what's the highlights and what we've done in the 10 years, it's the fact actually that we've had to exist, which actually is quite depressing, isn't it? But I think the fact that we've been a consistent voice, a consistent grassroots campaigning organisation that hasn't compromised on what we want to say or do, it means that we've been very poor, we don't have loads of funding, we don't access funding streams and all that kind of thing, but we effectively run off people power. And I would say that's our strength, that we run off people power and we have that independence and we have that determination to continue speaking out. Yeah, in 10 years time, I think Hector already answered that question. We'd like to not exist. I actually think it's horrific. Although it's fantastic to see young people rising up and leading the way, it's horrific that they have to in the first place, because my parents' generation already went through that. Now we're talking about, spending a whole lifetime for my generation doing it, and then another generation doing the same. So I would hope that we don't have to exist in 10 years, but I'm not actually hopeful. In terms of all the other questions, there's not a lot of time to go through them in detail. But what I would say is we don't need new legislation. We actually need some legislation to go away, and that's the Immigration Act, which Labour had said if they had come into power they would repeal. And it's been added on to all the time, and so it's getting worse and worse. You know, the government are continuing with their hostile environment and anti-immigrant stance. So I would say it's a campaign to get rid of that piece of legislation. I don't really think it's a matter of getting more and more legislation. We've had tons and tons and tons of equality legislation. We have protection in law against discrimination. The reality is it doesn't happen, you know, in real life. So I don't think it's the law that we need to change. It's people, it's perceptions, it's actions, it's institutions that need to change. And that actually ties into the other questions that were linked in there. Actually, you know, for us to increase our representation in the judicial system and in other institutions and on boards and so on and so forth, institutional racism, systemic racism needs to be rooted out. And actually that leads us into something we wanted to touch on later on in the conversation about Black Lives Matter and what they're calling for. You know, the movement across globally, a global movement that is calling for racism to stop. So actually it's hearts, it's minds, it's attitudes, it's stronger penalties, you know, and the judicial system is an institutionally racist system. The civil service is. Hector mentioned that, you know, his organisation has had Black Lives Matter statement. I had a meeting in my trade union role as a negotiator with the Cabinet Office last week, which they called, which had two topics on the agenda, which was the disproportionate impact of COVID on BAME people and Black Lives Matter. I never thought I would sit in a meeting, negotiations meeting with the government, you know, heads of government, talking about Black Lives Matter, but we did. So there is a turning point potentially that we can grasp right now, but we all have to be accountable, I think, and take action. Donna, did you want to add anything?
Oh, just on the subject of education, how we provide good education for all, and that our children see representations, like Zita said, representations, not just when we get into employment, but also in the things that we get taught. And just a big up and shout out to Stephanie Peters, who's campaigned and run a number of petitions around Black history in our curriculum. A number of Black activists have been involved in trying to champion the cause of the decolonisation of our curriculum and the Eurocentric nature of the curriculum as it is. Lots of young students as well, students at UCL and students across different university campuses have been calling for the decolonisation of their curriculums with regards to, if you look at some of the reading lists that people are given when they're studying at university, all white author reading lists are given to people in all subjects. They go to university and don't see any representation of their cultures and the contributions that their people have made to society in every level of subject matters. Then you look at also, so we've had a number of people that have set up campaigns around why my curriculum is white, why is my professor not Black? So there's lots of campaigning work that's happened that needs to be supported and championed, because I think we've got to start as well at the education that is given to the masses, that what is delivered to us. And obviously it's going to be very difficult under a Conservative government to champion this stuff and to receive some, you know, some semblance of concessions, but we have to demand those concessions. I think now is a very good time. You see, think about we'll talk about it later, but about like the toppling of the statues, about the uncovering of and the widening of the knowledge around slavery and the legacies of slavery, and the colonisation. I think it's really important that some of the questions that were asked by Beverly raised were really important, you know, especially around education and representation. So yeah, I do agree that we need to make sure that those campaigns win out.
Thank you, Donna. Velma, did you want to ask your question? You're on mute.
Sorry, people, I'm still getting used to Zoom. This is my second week.
Oh, wow.
Right. Going back to the Windrush scandal, and thinking about the response from the Jamaican High Commission especially, did you invite anybody to this meeting, a representative who could give us an update on what is going on in terms of the deportees? We heard Lee mention the young boy being bullied and people being killed in Jamaica. Are they aware of this event today?
No, we didn't invite them because it's BARAC's 10-year anniversary event where we've tied in Windrush. It isn't supposed to be an event that's just on Windrush. It's supposed to be about our 10 years anniversary, but we will certainly be doing some more of these Zoom events going forward. And we have engaged with the Jamaican High Commissioner, you know, over the last few years. In fact, at one point when there was one of the deportation flights going and they were taking people that shouldn't be going, not this one last year, the year before, at 1 in the morning, I was able to get a message through and wake the High Commissioner up if he had indeed gone to bed by then, and ask him to intervene and get involved in some of the people that were being deported through the middle of the night. So I've had direct conversations with him. I think, though, it's not really the High Commission that has got that authority or power. We're talking about the Jamaican government, all of the governments that are accepting, because there are countries that are not accepting these charter flights to land on their shores. And we also know that for every person deported, the government receiving that person gets a huge, large sum of money. You know, so I think there are financial implications, and they could refuse, but they state that they can't refuse, but they can. So I think there is pressure that needs to be put on other governments, not just our own government, in terms of what's happening.
And I just wanted to quickly say about, we are hearing about black men being killed in the US, George Floyd's case, which we've all mentioned. Do you have a list of names of black men, people in this country who've been killed in police custody? Because everybody in this country needs to be aware of this.
Yeah, there's a list. United Family and Friends have a list. In fact, when we do the march each year, they roll out a banner that has all the names. It's not men, it's everybody, because we shouldn't forget about the women who have died at the hands of the state. One of the campaigns we've been heavily involved in recent times is the Sarah Reid campaign for justice. So men and women have been dying at the hands of the state. And that's why it's important for people to go on that UFFC website, look at what they're doing, look at what the families are saying, and you can see the names of the people there. And I think Hector was posting a link anyway into the thread there on it for us to see, so people can access it directly. I'm going to pause. We're going to come back to another round of questions. We've started to talk about some of the things we were going to talk about later, but it's all good. Doesn't matter whether we mix it up and move it around. And I'd like Jean-Marc. Jean-Marc, in introducing the second segment of the film, can you say, a question for you, why did you make this film? Why did you feel it was important to make the film? Because when we had the very first meeting, it wasn't on Windrush, was it? It was on racism.
It was on racism,
UK,
I think.
and then you focused it on Windrush.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I wanted to do a series on racism in Britain and really ask the question. And I think that as the more I was discussing with Zita, the more I realized that the Windrush case need to be highlighted first before I can go on to the next series, the next documentary. And I think that the more I was journeying with Zita and some of the people that obviously we're going to watch this clip with Bilal really speaking of a time in a detention center, as well as other story that emerged as well, the more I really felt compelled to really, as I said, to bring justice. You know, I'm very passionate about bringing justice, giving a voice to those who actually can't speak freely. And that's been one of the reasons I've been doing this film. I do believe that racism is a virus that needs to be uprooted, you know, from every society. And my way to do it is through films, is really exposing stories that has been buried under, you know, sometimes people don't really want to expose certain things. And I felt really that we needed to do more. We needed to do something that will actually gather people to not only to think, but to begin to take action. So the clip that I'm going to show you is really focusing on Ulalu, focusing on Zita as well, really explaining some of the story in terms of the deportation and detention. The Immigration Act 2014 was given royal assent. According to the Home Office, the Act was to ensure that British immigration system would be fairer to British citizens and legitimate migrants, while being tougher on those with no right to be here. Indeed, Home Secretary Theresa May at the time was explicit when the bill was introduced that its purpose was to create a hostile environment for migrants in the UK.
Well, essentially, it was about fast-tracking deportations. Theresa May had already gone into the election saying she was going to bring the numbers down of immigration down to the tens of thousands, which was an ambitious claim. She was never going to get there. But in order to try and facilitate that, they needed a piece of legislation that would allow them to bypass human rights legislation and remove people very quickly. And they were able to do that by removing legal aid to those who had in-country appeals against unfair Home Office decisions. And from that point on, you had a right to appeal, but you could only do it from the country you were deported to. So in effect, you didn't have a right to an appeal, essentially, unless you had lots of money and you could afford private lawyers to whichever country you were deported to.
When we found out about this particular flight, we only really found out, you know, about a week before. So in that time, we started, you know, trying to lobby airlines, the airports, raising awareness, you know, doing a Twitter storm around what was happening, and doing a call out for people to actually get some advice if they think they could fall into this category. You know, trying to reach out to people who were being detained or threatened with deportation.
I asked them if I can call my solicitor. They said, you have to call your solicitor when you reached at the detention center at Yardswood. So they took me there. They waited until about, I think it was about 8 o'clock in the night before they took me from Beckett House to Yardswood. We reached there about 12 or a little bit after 12.
We get calls from people who are destitute or got nowhere to sleep or nothing to eat. There's a stigma attached to them. So what we've seen even this year, you know, the likes of the Jamaican Gleaner newspaper, who I wrote to the particular journalist on one occasion and complained, having screaming headlines of convict plane arriving in Jamaica. And that was at the same time that the Home Secretary announced in Parliament the week of that deportation that this isn't Windrush generation people. These are people that are very serious criminals. They're rapists and murderers. And the vast majority of those people didn't fall into those categories. And they included, for example, somebody who had done a serious driving offence, was a young person. So we're talking about, amongst those people deported, there were 22, 23 and 24-year-olds that were targeted.
Inside Yardswood, it's like a hell. It shouldn't be for human. Even with the food that you get there to eat.
You have somebody that's ushering you that you're handcuffed to, so you don't have your own phone, so we had to speak to him through that person. And he said, well, you know, but we said, but he's not supposed to be taken. He said, well, until I have authority and anybody tells me anything different, I have to take him. You know, there are several people, he actually said this to me on the phone, there are several people who are saying the same thing tonight, that they shouldn't be taken.
I was vomiting and blood was coming up. So while I was vomiting and they were knocking on the door, and I told them, I'm ill, I'm ill, I'm vomiting. You need to get the healthcare or someone to come and have a look. So when the officer came, they have to take me down to the healthcare. They get a wheelchair and take me down to the healthcare. And then she says to me that she won't let they take me in that state.
One person that I've been campaigning for had got an injunction, his legal team had got him an injunction the day before to take him off that flight, and in the middle of the night he was snatched. And the way it's done is really horrendous. So he was still in detention. So of course he went to bed, even though he knew that a flight was going, thinking he was okay. His family were actually, his partner with children, were going to drive down the night before, thinking they're going to have to say their final goodbyes. And when the injunction came through, they said, okay, there's no need for us to rush there midweek with small children driving 200 miles. We can wait for the weekend and go and see him. There's no urgency. So they didn't go. And around 1 a.m., I got a call from his partner saying they've taken him. And I actually said, taken him where? I mean, it's obvious when she said they've taken him, why? But it's just like, I couldn't believe this is happening. I had to process it in my own mind. Is this really happening?
I didn't doubt that bacteria was on my stomach. The food that you eat inside there. And not just my stomach, there are lots of people who are having problems. You know?
We had to wake up the legal team in the middle of the night. They had to do another injunction in the middle of the night. And when they queried with the courts, why have you done this? The response that came back was that a fax came through undoing the injunction from the day before, which was an application that was done way before then. So they've decided they'll answer that one from 2 or 3 or 4 weeks ago, but they'll do it at 2 a.m. in the morning when you're querying why they've done this. So they cancelled out, they undone the one from the afternoon before. They had to do another one in the middle of the night. That took through the whole process of the night, so that by the time the individual was told that he would be allowed to stay in the UK, even though he was put back in detention, he was already on the plane, and he was the final person they put on the flight, boarded, because they knew, because we'd alerted them to the fact that there was something really wrong. So they even held off, put him on the flight to the last minute. By that time, he's chained from the waist down, and you're cuffed and attached to 2 guards on either side. And that's how you're taken. Imagine, it's uncomfortable anyway, isn't it, on a long flight, a long-haul flight, or even a short-haul flight. Imagine having to sit like that. So when you want to go to the toilet, you're chained to these 2 people. And so he was already in that position, ready for takeoff, and then he got a tap on the shoulder saying, oh, we're taking you off now. By that time, he's been taken in the middle of the night, in a minivan, all the way from London to Birmingham, only to be taken all the way back.
I didn't get any medication because the medication that I take in with me, they had it. And they didn't give it to me. They didn't give the medication to me because they said they have to check on what I'm getting first. So they gave me Panadol, paracetamol.
There was an elderly woman whose grandchildren had grown up in the UK. Her husband was British, and she was in the final stages of being naturalised when her husband died, sadly. And she was told, well, your husband's dead now, so you don't need to stay in the UK.
So many things happened since 2003. It is unfair for me, if I did say, well, then commit a crime or was in anything wrong, and then that is my punishment, then I would say, well, then, you know, I made a wrong choice by being on the wrong side of the law. But I've never, and I'm not intent to, even though they are doing me all this displeasure, they are the only people that done me displeasure, and that's the Home Office. I've never have any problem with anyone else. I've got so many friends here. I've got my family here, my children, my grandchildren, my friends.
One man went to sign in, his regular fortnightly signing in, and obviously when you're in that immigration status you can't work, so he was the primary carer of his young infant and his partner went to work. So he had the baby, you know, in the pushchair. They took the baby away and gave the baby to social services and didn't even afford him a phone call to call the partner, the mum or any other family member to say, can you come and get the baby? So that means they had social services standing by ready, because otherwise it would have been quicker to just let him phone a family member to come and get the baby.
At that time that the presenting officer for the Home Office, when I told them that I keep asking for my passport from since 2003, and he just said, we got it.
So they had this passport all along?
All along.
And they make you go through all those years, knowing that they had your passport all along?
Yes.
Are they giving you your passport back?
I haven't seen my passport until now.
And there are people who have been born in Britain, and there are cases, like current cases going on at the moment, who are being told that they are not British citizens. They're born in Britain. So I know of a number of different scenarios, different cases. So there's one where they were born in Britain, they grew up in Britain for part of their childhood, and then one of their parents went back to the Caribbean and they grew up for the rest of the time there. They're told they're not British.
So to me, it's like you're trading on people's life. You're trading on people's livelihood. You're robbing people of their livelihood, of their integrity, their dignity.
Thank you for that. And as you can see from Yuli's account in particular and Glenda's earlier, this is almost like a triple punishment that people are going through. Everybody that we've spoken to who has ever been in prison as well as in detention has said the detention centre is worse than the prison, because in prison you would know what your sentence is going to be. You know, when you can get off for good behaviour, you can go back into the world, rehabilitate and get on with your life. Whereas in detention, you're waiting in limbo, the conditions are horrific, and you don't know if in the middle of the night they're going to come and they're going to take you, and you may never ever see your family and your loved ones again. So that's what makes it much worse, as well as the basic conditions and treatments that's already been mentioned by Yuli. So it's a horrific situation for the individual there and also for their families. So I'm going to open it up to see if there's any more questions. I'll start by asking Donna and Hector, who've been monitoring the chat, if there's any questions come through on there.
got one on email. Should I just read the email one out, Zita?
Please, Hector.
Yeah, okay. It's a short one. I think you're probably best placed to answer this one. If you were president or prime minister right now, what 4 things would you do next?
Why am I best placed? Gosh, if I was president or prime minister right now, we'd have to overhaul the whole political system. Everything would have to change. And that's not going to, change can't happen overnight, can it? It's a long system and process of making those changes. And you need to have everybody on board with you to really progress those changes. But I have no desire, I have to say, to be prime minister or president. But if I was, I would definitely want to be engaged and embedded and connected to the people of the country, because I think politicians aren't. The large majority of them are not. You have some good MPs here and there who are really good constituency MPs, but that's not the experience, with many. So yeah, I think we would have to review and change the whole political system. But the chances of that happening, me being prime minister or president, even if I had a desire, are very slim. Does anybody else want to answer that question? Hector, Donna, Jean-Marc?
I definitely have no desire for political office, so as I thought you might be better placed than me.
I think for me, it's just my skills. I'll just keep my skill where they are, just making film and just exposing the truth. That's really.
Okay, just scanning the chat, Z, I see one question from Sandra. The question is there any way to help someone who's already been involuntarily removed?
Well, there is. So you're talking about somebody that's been deported. Out of country appeals are really, really difficult. In fact, there's a comment in the thread from one of the organisations in Scotland that actually do a lot of this work. But we know, because we work with lawyers as well, and we have lawyers in our BAME lawyers group, that will tell you that out of country appeals are very, very difficult. So it isn't that there isn't a way. And with some of the people from the Windrush generation, they have eventually got back to the UK, some who found themselves exiled, because some people have been deported, but other people went on holiday, went back to the Caribbean we've been talking a lot about the Caribbean, but this does affect people across the African continent and the Asian continent. So it isn't just the Caribbean people this is impacting on. And they're all the Windrush generation, as well, who came from Commonwealth countries, former Commonwealth countries. So there has been successes in people coming back because of the Windrush scandal, but it isn't easy. It's quite a difficult process. And actually, I mentioned at the beginning that only 36 people have had compensation. And some of the compensation that people would be seeking is effectively, imagine you went away on holiday for a couple of weeks, went to get the plane back home. And of course, if you've gone for 2 weeks, you haven't settled all your business at home because you're just going temporarily. And told, well, you can't go back to the UK, you don't have a relevant passport. But they had a relevant passport to leave, just not to come back. That's how terrible the system is. And then have found themselves fighting, for months, more like years and even decades to get back. And there's some cases I've supported where one man found himself in that situation, and his daughters were only in their teens, still at school. One had to give up going to university. Both of them had to start working before they'd finished the education they wanted to finish, so that they could save enough money to even get on a flight to go to the Caribbean to try and start the process of helping their father to come back. And by the time he came back, he was a very elderly man. And imagine by then you've lost everything as well. So is there any other questions come in, Hector? Or should we open it up, see if anybody's got any?
I think
I couldn't see him.
Guy Brewer asked a question, but he's had to leave now.
Okay.
But he did thank us for the event. He said, how can a senior manager at head office, I think this is PCS, advising the Home Office. How can a senior manager at Home Office advising the Home Office Race Board claim to be woefully ignorant of race issues? Heads must roll.
Okay. Yeah, so he's talking about the report we mentioned earlier that was carried out on the Home Office and Windrush, the Lessons Learned report, which has a series of recommendations, which includes that there should be Black history taught, there should be a race board and race monitoring of cases in the Home Office. And Hector and I are union reps in the union that has members in the PCS union. Guy is a PCS representative, union representative. And so even amongst our members, there's a lot of Black or BAME members that work for the Home Office. And we've had cases there because they face discrimination in appraisal and racist harassment and bullying. And so that report came out right in the start of the pandemic. And we're waiting for those recommendations to be taken forward. And it's something we've raised with the civil service because we think that actually they're recommendations that could be applied across the whole of government, not just in that one department. Any other questions from anybody?
You mentioned before, Zita, that there was someone on the chat that had mentioned about they were from an organisation. Yvonne Blake, I don't know if they're in the chat in the conversation now still, but Yvonne Blake says, I'm a co-founder of Routes to Return in Glasgow, and we are at the forefront in a campaign in raising funds to pay £140 for an out-of-country appeal, as well as gathering evidence that was used in the High Court to successfully challenge to deport now, appeal later system.
Okay, I know that Velma's got her hand up. I just wanted to check if anybody who hasn't spoken yet has spoken. That's why I haven't brought you in, because I can see that somebody's rooting for your question to be asked in the chat. So is there anybody else who hasn't spoken? And if not, I'll bring in Velma. No, I'm trying to look through the pages. Can't see everybody. Go ahead, Velma.
Do you remember there used to be a race equality scheme for statutory agencies? I'm not sure, was this abolished in 2010? Do you remember each organization had to complete an impact assessment once a year? I know this for local government, and I'm sure they disbanded that when the Tory government came in, and that has taken race off the agenda in a sense, and other reasons why. I'm just asking, are you aware of this, and is it something that they're going to bring, that you could campaign to bring back? Because then it allows employers, they have to complete an impact assessment every year, and they have to show what is happening to BAME now staff, how they are progressing within an organization. And this is looking at systemic racism as well within the organization.
Thank you. Yes, we live and breathe this issue every day. Hector and I in particular have to say for many years. I'm going to ask Hector to answer this because I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. So yeah, but I do know the answer, but Hector does as well.
Yeah, I mean, but the legislation did change in 2010 with the Equality Act, and there was brought in the public sector equality duty. However, it's a little bit more complicated because there was a part of the Act, Section 1 of the Equality Act, which has been enacted in Scotland and Wales, but hasn't been enacted in England. So it's a complicated picture. In addition to that, people will remember we used to have equality commissions for various protected categories. We used to have we used to have the Commission for Racial Equality, for example. That all got abolished. We've now got a single equality body, the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Clearly, we campaigned against the abolition of the separate bodies and the effective amalgamation to one body, because we saw that was going to lead to a diminution in the sorts of protections that there are. So yes, broadly speaking, there are things like the public sector equality duties that sort of basically was the successor to the race equality schemes. But certainly in my view, it was not as good as what we had before in a lot of ways. In ways we've gone backwards in some respects. But yeah, there are, it's certainly for public authorities, they do have obligations in that regard. And certainly the key thing is basically making sure that the public authorities honour their commitments. You can't just assume they're going to honour their commitments. You need to have, strong trade unions and so forth to actually challenge those organisations to meet their obligations in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Hector. I've just looked at the chat properly and I realised it was my dad rooting for you to have your question asked. Happy Dad's Day, Dad.
Happy Dad's Day.
And so any other questions or contributions from anybody?
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's Charles. Can I ask my question?
Yeah.
So looking at what's been happening in the US, the Black Lives Matter movement, I find it quite encouraging. You can see that they've won quite a few concessions based on people being out on the streets day in, day out for the last 3 weeks. And they've won concessions from the state, including police officers being charged with murder, something that's never happened in this country or in the US. So will BARAC be copying the tactics of the Black Lives Matter and actually organizing actions on the streets, direct actions, and demanding police officers who murdered black people in this country be charged with murder? Because it seems to me that there's an over-reliance on the parliamentary route and trade unions and the Labour Party rather than taking direct action. To me, these organizations are actually part of the establishment and they are part of the problem. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that question. So I don't think we'd be copying what Black Lives Matter do. Actually, it's not quite correct what you're saying. We don't rely on trade unions. We don't rely on the government. We don't rely on all the bodies you're talking about. We're campaigners. So what we do is we use absolutely every tool available to us. And we have a track record and a history of calling protests, demonstrations and marches, probably held more marches and demonstrations than any organisation I could think of over the 10 years that we've existed. And so we actually are not usually one of the first organisations, and might be we call it, or we work with other black organisations and call it, to call solidarity demos when somebody dies at the hands of the state in the USA, in the UK. We support family justice campaigns. So we've done loads and loads and loads of marches and demonstrations outside the Home Office, outside Downing Street, to Parliament, through central London. We did a direct action on Windrush Day last year to highlight the ongoing injustice, which was 8 simultaneous actions in cities across the UK, which was not just BARAC, this was through our umbrella organisation we're part of, BAME Lawyers for Justice, and all the Windrush groups. And in London, we'd had a march from Downing Street, and we had a banner drop over Westminster Bridge, and we brought traffic to a standstill. In March, just before lockdown, when there was a charter flight, we had demonstrations in central London protesting that. So we've been protesting and demonstrating for 10 years non-stop. But we don't think that protesting and demonstrating is the only thing we should do. We think we should use Parliament, we should use the law, we should lobby government, we should use every tool and every aspect of campaigning. We use petitions. Some of you may know about this event through signing some of our petitions. So we use everything, and we campaign using every tool that's available with us, and we work with other race equality groups across the UK. The protests that are being called, we absolutely stand in solidarity 100% with those people that are calling those demonstrations and going to them. But we have a policy decision not to call any demonstrations at this time. In fact, you've now brought us into, with your question, the next section of what we were going to talk about. So I might as well sort of say something about that now, and then bring in some more questions and contributions from Hector and Donna and Jean-Marc. the reason why we're not calling any demonstrations at this time is because COVID-19 is killing Black people disproportionately. Black people or BAME people are 4 times more likely to die from the virus, and we've been campaigning for protections in terms of our trade union role in terms of workplaces and people not having to go back to work physically. We know that public sector workers, public transport workers are dying disproportionately. People working in the health service are dying disproportionately. So we made a decision. There's a statement on our website that we put up about a month ago as to why we're not calling demonstrations, but we fully understand and support the reason those demonstrations are being called. And if it wasn't for the coronavirus pandemic, absolutely, we probably would have been one of the first organizations to go and call a demo after the murder of George Floyd in America. We've spent quite a lot of our life outside that USA embassy, unfortunately, and we've also supported and hosted family members who've come over from the USA to the UK. For example, the family of Trayvon Martin, the young Black man that was murdered in America. We hosted them at a press conference and did a demonstration outside Downing Street with them. We go to the United Family and Friends demonstration every year, as well as calling our own demos and protests. So absolutely agree with you, direct action is very important in campaigning, but we believe so is everything else important too, and that we should hold to task governments and institutions rather than just not engage with them at all. Actually, we should pin them down and say what you're doing is incorrect and inappropriate, and that includes in the trade union movement getting our own house in order. Believe me, we're not backwards about coming forwards in talking about any failures within the trade union movement on equality, but we actually think that Black people should be in all those institutions and all those organisations, including trade unions, because our voices are crucial and important in changing what's happening there and making sure Black people are represented. And we have strong Black structures in those unions that are self-organised and fight for race justice, and also lead the way on justice campaigns within the trade union movement and outside. And one of the things that formed BARAC was bringing together trade unionists and community activists to work together, because up until that point, really, the two groups had worked separately, and we thought it was important to bring everybody together. These are issues that impact on everybody, and we have to mobilise and organise if we want to make a difference. I'll bring Hector and Donna in, see if they want to say anything on those points, because it is actually, the next section was on Black Lives Matter, COVID and decolonisation that we wanted to finish off with for the day. So we might as well start that conversation. So I'll bring you in if you want to answer that question, but also to give your contribution, Donna and Hector, and then we'll open it up again.
Okay, so I'll come in first. I mean, I'm just conscious that we ain't got a lot of time left on the meeting, so I'll be very brief, just to basically support what you've just said, Zita. In the day, I'm a union member, I pay my subscriptions. I'm a taxpayer, I pay my taxes. So I on that ground alone, we've got to make sure that we hold our politicians to account, who take decisions on our behalf, whether we like it or not. And, as a trade union member, I think it's important that trade unions have regard to the issues that we face. I'm not saying it should be us exclusively. The other groups that are, again, suffering different forms of oppression that need to have their issues addressed as well. So I think it's important that we do actually, we do participate throughout. And I think, direct action definitely has its place. There's been cases where it's been like the three of us doing direct action, and we're trying to get more people to join us. So absolutely up for that. Should I just do my contribution now, Zita, on my part of the agenda? Is that all right? Yeah.
On COVID,
yeah. On COVID. Yeah. I mean, I think
before you start, Charles has said we're pathetic for not holding any demonstrations because Black people are dying disproportionately. We don't think we're pathetic. Obviously, you're entitled to your opinion, but I think it would be good if you could address that point, Hector, in your contribution.
Well, I think it's a bit on Charles' part. I mean, I disagree. I can understand where Charles is coming from. I have felt the urge strongly in recent weeks to go out and demonstrate. Really have, and it's been really difficult. There have been actions. I mean, I know there's been. I certainly haven't gone to, for example, Parliament Square or Hyde Park, because it was impossible to do social distancing. I have, for example, taken part in local demonstrations in my own local area in Hackney where we could do social distancing. So we have been out there to make our voices heard. I think the key, the position that we've taken is the right one. I think it's really, really difficult to make the argument. So, for example, as a trade unionist, who I'm arguing every day for people who are working from home, because that's the safest thing for them to be doing, to be working from home, to actually stop their employee and saying, go back to the office, to fight on behalf of those members in that situation. But then on the other hand, say that if we're calling a demonstration in Hyde Park or whatever, it's okay for people to go. It's a difficult issue. And so I understand people's disagreement, but I would urge Charles and others that I think that way, say that we're not that far apart. It's just, it's basically, there are good, I hope that Charles would respect our reasons for taking the stance that we've taken, just as we respect his position for the stance that he has taken. I think that's the best way forward. Just very briefly, because I'm again conscious of the time, I think certainly in recent weeks, I've had loads and loads of arguments. So in many ways, things have been positive. The reaction to people think of Black Lives Matter and so on, but there have been some difficult conversations I've had. I've had people all the time say to me, you know, the virus doesn't discriminate. We're all in this together. And the reason, I understand why people say those things, but it is actually in some respects really, really unhelpful. And I think the key thing for me that brought it home to me is you probably would have saw when the pandemic at its height, and we all knew, for example, that healthcare workers, it was inevitable that healthcare workers were, some of them unfortunately were going to end up passing away as a result of this virus. And it really struck home when you see the pictures on the screen, the first few doctors, the first few nurses dying as a result of COVID, all Black. And you can't make the argument if people didn't know about social, about hygiene standards, for example. So you can't blame that as a reason to why they fell to that illness. Clearly, in our view, racism has a part to play in what has happened here. There's absolutely no doubt about that, and we have to absolutely expose that and actually challenge that. Clearly, I don't want another, I know Boris Johnson he's announced his inquiry of sorts into racial injustice. I'm not particularly interested in that, although saying that, at some point, there will have to be, as I say, a public inquiry into what transpired in terms of COVID, because that does need to be gone over very, very carefully. I think the key thing is that there has to be recognition that there are groups in society that have been disproportionately adversely affected by COVID-19. And there has to be measures taken now to address that issue. And that's certainly, I welcome the Public England report that came out, even though there was a bit of a kerfuffle about how the parts of the report were published and then had to be effectively dragged out at a later point. We do need to actually continue to campaign on this issue. Certainly BARAC will continue to campaign on this issue, because it is really, really important that we do so. Because again, one of the things that we absolutely are keen about is challenging injustice. And this is just a further injustice, which before the pandemic hit, you could absolutely see coming. You could see the situation coming. So I think it's absolutely imperative that we did take our, as an organisation, alongside others, work and campaign on this issue. So I'll stop there, because I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Hector. And the other thing, just to add there, incidentally, the Black Lives Matter movement you've seen it grow up is groups of people, predominantly young people, who fantastically come together to make a stand and protest, who are not officially Black Lives Matter, but they're calling themselves, because it's a global movement, but Black Lives Matter UK, who are officially recognised in the USA, they haven't called protests either for similar reasons. And the other thing to add is that some of us are in families that are shielding or at high risk or highly vulnerable. So people shouldn't judge if individuals don't go out and protest, and it's not a competition. So if you don't see some people on protests, there may be valid reason that they don't want to put themselves at risk because they're shielding, or they don't want to put the family they live with or care for at risk. So that's important to remember. We shouldn't be here to judge each other and criticize each other. It's about what can we do collectively to work together. And it might be it's different things we can contribute and different things we can do, but all of those actions that we all do individually all add up to a whole. So the young Black people, we are worried about them being out there, but they are making a difference, and they are making people listen and see you know, the strength of anger and determination and feeling, and I'm really proud of them for that. But it doesn't, you know, it doesn't follow that everybody else who is not on a protest is a bad person. That's not correct at all. I'd like to ask Donna to speak next.
Yeah.
And Donna is going to speak a bit about, because linked to the whole Black Lives Matter and institutional racism is the issue of decolonization. And that actually directly links into the two. Donna, thanks very much.
That's okay, that's okay. So just touching on what some of the stuff that's just been mentioned, and listening to Black people in the movement, and understanding our concerns. And really, I just want to echo as well that there's a number of people, white people, that will be joining the discussions and debate, and that's really, really important, that we have unity in our struggle, and they are looking to see how they can support us and how they can work in a way that doesn't overpower our voices. There's someone on the chat that's mentioned, where is it? I've lost it. No. Okay, so white people speaking, it's from Mary Simpson. White people, speaking for myself, are feeling that they have not done enough, as are reflective and are trying to listen and learn, and are working out how they can successfully become anti-racist or do anti-racism. Okay, so on that point, with regards to like the decolonisation and decolonising, so the and the legacy of slavery, and the narrative around it as well. In my local area, I've noticed in discussion forums the thirst of people following the toppling of the Colston statue, people wanting to engage in the campaign to rid our streets and our of monuments that glorify slave owners, and street names and building names, that kind of thing, and replace them with other names. But I've noticed as well in some of those discussions, what I've found is when Black people speak out and talk about alternative names to things, or what we could put in its place, that their voices are drowned out by well-meaning socialists and anti-racists, white people, who think fantastic alternative suggestions and then they literally all crowd out the conversation by agreeing with themselves that their alternative is a really good alternative, and it may even be a really good alternative. But sometimes in the methods of the discussion as well, even on the campaigning to make changes, we're losing the aspect, or there can be definitely a loss of the aspect of centering the Black voice when we're talking about issues of race and anti-racism and racism. And you see that if you think about the analogy with regards to discussions on equality for women, or sexual harassment, or discussions about all sorts of things around women, and you can see forums discussions suddenly, you know, well-meaning ally men can come onto the discussion, who are, you know, feminist and whatever, and start the discussion, and it ends up the woman's voices end up being a minority of voices and get overcrowded. So I think that's one of the things for people to be aware of when they're having discussions or being involved in movements around anti-racism and challenging racism, is we want good allies, we need allies, but we don't need to be drowned out as Black people, and we need our voices heard. I think that's one of the most important things around the movement that's ignited, is that people are saying Black Lives Matter is not just a slogan, it's a rallying cry from Black people that are saying enough, we've had enough, no more. And I think if you centre that in your head when you're engaging, all of us are engaging together, I think you get the point that they need to be centred. And therefore, when we talk about companies, for example, talking about putting up slogans on their Instagram or blacking out their Instagram pages, a lot of young people have called it out. Black and white have called it out and said, hang on a second here, you're saying Black Lives Matter, you're saying you have solidarity with people who are campaigning against the brutal murder of George Floyd, and yet your institution, look at the structure of your institution, look at the staffing structure of your institution. So we're asking, when we're talking about decolonising, we're, as Black people, people are looking at it much more wider than the tearing down of statues, though that is very, very important. And how that's done is important. But we're also talking about decolonising the status quo, the fact that we are at the bottom run, that we do not have equality of opportunity, that our voices are not heard, that in positions that make decisions in areas of everyday life, whether it's in our social movements, if you look at who is making the decisions in our social movements, in our trade unions and whatever, we have to make sure that we as well, you know, co-opt this change, that we bring about this change as well. It's not just about externally looking at things and having slogans. We're saying from top to bottom, we need root branch change. And so when we're talking to organisations, we're talking about structural changes that are implemented, planned to implement to reduce inequality and to bring about proper parity of opportunity and representation. So whether that's in the Labour Party, employment institutions, in our socialist movements, we mean everywhere. We mean that we literally we're sick of sitting at the back of the bus, and we're not sitting at the back of the bus anymore. Yeah, I mean, it's literally as much as that. So in every structure, we can't nasal gaze outside, look at outside and say it's terrible out there. We have to look inside in our structures as well. On the issue of the statues, which is what I was supposed to be talking about, I think.
We're at 2 minutes past 5, so we've just gone over. Just pause a minute, Donna. Are people happy to go for another 10 minutes? Because I need to call in Jean-Marc to make some final comments as a filmmaker and some wrap-up comments myself. Is that okay for 10 minutes more, people? Yeah? Okay, go on, Donna.
Sorry, so just on the issue of the statues, we, as people have articulated in the discussion already, we are living the legacy of enslavement, writ large, on building structures and institutions, and the wealth of society built on the blood of our ancestors. And people say, oh, slavery was a long time ago and, you should get over it, but we are still not free from the shackles, as I've described, of oppression, of degradation and subjugation. The abolition of slavery in 1833 brought about a compensation scheme which compensated slave owners, not the enslaved, to the tune of £20 million. I mean, lots of people now are hearing about this for the first time, but lots of people knew about this as well. That's really good. But we are talking about a sum of its day so huge that we were still, as British taxpayers, paying this money off to slave owners, families and institutions till 2015. So I think what I want to end with, when we talk about how Black lives are treated and the racism we have suffered and how we are not valued, that just goes to show how we are not valued. Just in that the terms of the fact that has instilled and stayed in place till 2015, 400 years we've lived under a system of racism. And when we talk now about the rallying cry for reparations, we need to be heard. So we have a reparations march that takes place in August. It's August, I think it's August every year. Yeah. But also a lot of companies are now, and institutions, Lloyd's of London, lots of institutions are talking about they're having to pay reparations. We need to hold these people to account. If people can be compensated for, how many years? How many years was that? 182 years. 182 years we made those payments. Then no more talk about we can't afford reparations. In fact, this money should be repaid back to the state, repaid back and reparations properly handed out. I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Donna. So I'm glad that you mentioned reparations. I could see Cheryl's also mentioned it in the chat, and I was going to come in because I thought it's really important in the context of decolonization that we talk about reparations. So that's another event. I don't know if somebody can put in the chat the details of what is happening this year. I know there's some sort of review around it because of the situation we're in. So yeah, that's in August, so look out for that. But it's in August every year, so if something doesn't happen this year, there are all the subsequent years to come when that happens. And there is a reparations movement in the UK that's saying that we still haven't received reparations for enslavement of our ancestors and the ongoing legacy from colonialism and enslavement that we're suffering to this very day, which is why institutional racism exists. And reparations is not just about a financial compensation, it's actually about healing and peace and being able to live equally. So that's important to include. But I know we're nearly at, we've gone over, so I really want to thank Jean-Marc for having made this film, for having trekked up and down the country and here around and about and everywhere on our protests and demos and meetings and conferences for it's over 2 years you've been.
It was over 2 years, yeah.
And for making such an important film, because it is so important that this is documented, and it's so important that people understand the injustice that occurred but is still continuing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask Jean-Marc to speak about actually, how do you see your role as a filmmaker going forward in actually challenging injustice and racism?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. I think when I started this journey, which was about 2 years and a half ago, I was just driving home and I heard and saw witnesses, 2 women, a white woman and a black woman arguing. And one of the white women said, "Go home." And I think that's really prompted me to ask this question: is Britain racist? Are we going back to those days, those years when racism was very prevalent in England? And I think from that moment, then another story came about a whole lady that was also racially abused on a way, I don't know where she was going. She was on a Ryanair plane, I believe, and I really begin to absolutely, and I really begin to ask those questions deeply. And I think when I began this documentary, I just wanted to show people that racism was still taking place in this country. But I think spending time with Zita, with different other organizations like Movement for Justice, talking to Lalu, which is there, as you heard some of the testimony, speaking to Donna Guthrie, which is pretty much close to home, with the situation with her uncle as well. And I think I realized that as a documentary filmmaker, I believe I have a greater role to play, and not just to make film to look nice and, lovely on the surface, but really to send a message. I can't be an activist like you guys are. You guys are amazing, the way that you've been active for the last 10 years. And what I love about it is the consistency of the work as well. And I thought to myself, if I could, even use my skill, my talent to kind of bring justice, to kind of bring something which people don't really talk about, stories that people don't really talk about. We've seen many documentaries on Windrush and so on, but this is from the heart of the people, as they felt, as they lived this. And really what I want to do now, I really use that and moving forward and bring more story to the fore, so people can begin to take action. Because at the end of the day, if I make a film and there's no action, I would say that I haven't done my job. And my job is really to gather people to be able to take action, to be able to be aware of what's taking place. But not only be aware of it, do something about it. And not all of us can make film, not all of us can campaign, but I'm sure there's a skill, a talent that you have that you can actually use to help really to make a difference. And really that's what it's all about.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marc, for those words and for speaking and saying and for making the film. I want to share this placard I made for a campaign. Yeah. So this is for a video that's been made. Can you see it? Am I holding it at the right angle? I can never get these angles right on here. So somebody asked me 4 words of how I'm feeling about racism. So these are my 4 words: tired, angry, resilient, but determined as well. So I'm sharing those with you. So yes, I think using our creativity, and you can see this is my art and paintings behind on the wall. These are ways, we all have different talents. Some people are good at IT, some people are good at organizing, but if we pool all of those talents that we've got, actually, one of the things we do when we do virtual but physical meetings is we normally ask people to write down their name and then and their contact details, and also what can you do to contribute, what's your skill that you can contribute to the movement and the campaign. And so pooling all of that collective skills and talent and information and expertise is what actually keeps us strong and keeps us going. We have gone over time. As I said, there's quite a lot of information in the chat where we posted some of the things we talked about. What I'll do is put them into our social media as well, on Facebook and Twitter, so that you can see some of the links there if you've missed it on here. We will be in the next half hour, I'm going to put all the links up on our social media to the full-length film, so you can watch that at your leisure. We've recorded this, so by around tomorrow, within the next 24 hours, we'll put this out as well on our social media. So if you want to share it with anybody, you can share it again. Thank you to everybody for the lovely comments. Black Lives Matter t-shirt there, look, Velma's got
yes.
for that, sis. If you want to join BARAC, again, we'll put some stuff out about how you can join that, how you can affiliate to us, how you can support the work that we're doing. We really appreciate you being here today and giving up your Sunday, and we know it's Father's Day as well, and spending this time with us. Apologies that we've run a little bit over, but we really appreciate the fact that you've stayed on, or a lot of people have stayed on, because we know there's a lot going on. There's loads and loads of Windrush events on tomorrow, online and virtually.
Yes.
Google and you'll see them, but we're sharing this morning on Twitter. On our Twitter, I shared some links to several different things that are going on tomorrow that you can have a look at. And also Small Island is screening, the National Theatre screening that on YouTube, so you can watch Small Island. And Small Island stars a fantastic young actress called Leah Ferguson, who my son grew up with and went to primary and secondary school with. Her mother was my son's childminder, and I'm really, really proud of her. But it's absolutely a fantastic drama. And obviously Andrea Levi, may she rest in peace, wrote the fantastic Small Island book. So if you haven't read it, read it. And if you haven't watched it, you've got an opportunity to watch it in the next few days for free if you didn't make it to the theatre before lockdown. Thank you so much for being with us. Hope you have a fantastic Sunday afternoon. And yes, Black Lives Matter.
Yes,
thank
people.
you very much. Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to our fantastic speakers, Jean-Marc, Donna, and Hector, and I'll thank myself as well for sharing.
Yes, nice.
Because otherwise I won't get any thanks.
Thank you for joining us and celebrating.
Thank you. Thank you, Zita.
Oh,
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.